Okay, folks, welcome back to the program. I would say it's an understatement to say that I am excited. I am thrilled because I feel like I've gone up a notch with this gentleman here, William Federer. A lot of you know who he is. He's a famous historian, but I can call you Bill, correct?
Yes.
All right. Like I said, I'm excited to have you. I barely found out about Bill Federer about a week ago from a mutual acquaintance of ours, and you're a busy man. You just got off a podcast, and you probably had enough time to eat something and then run over here. But William J. Federer is a well-known American author, speaker, and historian. He is the president of Amerisearch Incorporated, a publishing company focused on researching America's Christian heritage. Federer is recognized for his extensive work in writing and speaking extensively about American history and particularly its Christian influences. He's authored over 20 books, including, and maybe not stopping at, America's God and Country, Encyclopedia of Quotations. That is one. The Faith of FDR, and the 10 Commandments and their influence on American law. Federer hosts the daily radio program, The American Minute, which highlights historical events, and the television show Faith and History on the TCT network. Now, his work often emphasizes the role of faith in American history, and he is known for his ability to connect historical events with spiritual insights. Born October 1st, 1957 in St. Louis, Missouri, Federer was the fifth of 11 children. He attended St. Louis University High School, studied at the University of Dallas, and then graduated from St. Louis University with a degree in accounting and business administration. Before his career as an author and speaker, he worked in real estate and the oil and gas industry. Federer also ventured into politics, running for a U.S. congressional seat in 2000 and 2004. Although he was not elected, his campaigns were notable for their significant financial backing and support for prominent political figures. In addition to his professional achievements, Federer is married to Susie, his wife, and they have four children. That is your high school sweetheart. You told me that earlier. That's amazing. A lot of people don't stay on their first marriage, and that's admirable. His contributions to historical scholarship and public speaking have earned him numerous awards and recognition. Without further ado, welcome to the program.
Hey, great to be with you.
Yeah. So we spoke on the phone a few days ago, and I know you are known for many different presentations that you give on history, and I mentioned a lot of your other feats and accomplishments as far as an author of 20 books in those areas. Today, I'm specifically interested in what we were talking about a little bit a few days ago, the JFK assassination, and how that connects or relates to Lyndon B. Johnson. And I would like you to just go ahead and begin wherever you would like to.
Well, sure. A little background. Lyndon Johnson was a congressman who was supported by Franklin Roosevelt during Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. And then Lyndon Johnson wants to run for Senate in Texas as a Democrat against the Democrat Texas Governor Coke Stevenson. And so the race is 1948. And Coke Stevenson was very popular and he won, except on election night. There mysteriously appeared a box of uncounted ballots that was discovered in the South Texas town of Alice in Jim Wells County, precinct number 13. This happened to be LBJ's hometown. And confusion reigned. And by the end of the week, LBJ had a slim margin of 87 votes, and that was enough for him to win the Democrat Senate primary in Texas. Well, because of the confusion, the FBI, the Postal Department, and other agencies were called in to investigate. Coke Stevenson, the Democrat governor, cried foul, and the pieces were put together, and the story emerged that LBJ's campaign manager, John B. Connolly, traveled to Alice, Texas on election night in Jim Wells County, and the political boss of the area was George Parr. He was nicknamed the Duke of Duval. He was a wealthy political boss in Jim Wells County. And he gave John Connolly, who was LBJ's campaign manager, access to these supposed box of newly found ballots. And so when there were questions about it, years later, George Parr suspiciously was suicided or committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
So you had the New York Times published an article in 1977. So this is nearly 30 years later. And the article is titled, "Ex-Official Says He Stole the 1948 Election for Johnson." And so this is the New York Times I'm quoting from. It says, "The disclosure was made by Louis Salas, who was the election judge in Jim Wells County, Box 13, which produced just enough votes," right? They found 202 extra votes in the 1948 Texas Democrat primary runoff to give Mr. Johnson the party's nomination to the U.S. Senate. He goes on, "Johnson did not win that election. It was stolen from him. And I know exactly how it was stolen." Mr. Salas, now a lean, white-haired 76-year-old. George B. Parr, a South Texas political leader whom Mr. Salas served for a decade and who shot and killed himself. Mr. Johnson was also dead by this time. So Mr. Salas said he decided to break his silence in quest for peace of mind. "I was just going along with my party," he said. Mr. Parr, the political boss, the Duke of Duval, had ordered that 200 odd votes be added to Mr. Johnson's total in Box 13. Mr. Salas said that he had seen the fraudulent votes added in alphabetical order.
Oh, wow.
And they were all names from the local cemetery, and they signed in with the same handwriting and the same ink. And so he goes on that he certified these as authentic on the order from Mr. Parr. Parr was the godfather. He could tell any election judge, "Give us 80% of the vote," and the other guy 20%. And we had to make it happen. The New York Times article continued. The Associated Press interviewed a former agent of the FBI, T. Kellis DeBrell, and he confirmed Mr. Salas's statement that the last 200 votes had been in alphabetical order. He goes on, "Mr. DeBrell said the last 202 names were made in the same colored ink, same handwriting, whereas the earlier names in the poll list were written by different individuals in different color inks. The final statewide count, including this Box 13, gave Mr. Johnson the extra 202 votes, which allowed him to win by an 87-vote margin, thus earning him the tongue-in-cheek nickname Landslide Lyndon." So it was not a landslide. It was by the skin of his teeth, but sort of as a joke, they would call him, "Oh, it was a landslide, 87-vote margin."
Wow.
Well, the Coke Stevenson called upon the Texas Democrat Central Committee, and it was deadlocked 28-28 whether or not to go with Coke Stevenson or with LBJ. John Connolly, LBJ's campaign manager, persuaded Frank W. Mayborn, the publisher of the Temple Daily Telegram newspaper, to cut short his business trip in Nashville and to come back to Texas and cast the deciding committee vote in favor of LBJ. So he comes back and LBJ wins. Well, Coke Stevenson decides to take LBJ to court, and he wins. The judge, T. Whitfield Davidson, orders LBJ's name to be taken off of the ballot for the general election. Well, LBJ turns to his Washington attorney friend, Abe Fortas, and Abe Fortas persuades Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black to intervene. Well, Hugo Black, who had been a former KKK member in the South and was appointed by FDR to the Supreme Court, Hugo Black overturns the lower court ruling and lets the Johnson-Stevenson race be decided by the Texas Democrat Central Committee. And so now LBJ is back on the general ballot. And since it's a Democrat state at the time, that meant LBJ would win the Senate. Now, in return for this favor, when Johnson finally becomes president years later, he appoints Abe Fortas to the Supreme Court in 1965. And Abe Fortas served on the Supreme Court for a few years and then had received money from a Wall Street financier to give a corrupt decision. And Abe Fortas was forced to resign from the Supreme Court. So a little bit of a background there.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the Washington Post continues this article. They said that their article is titled "How Landslide Lyndon Earned His Name." This was published March 4th, 1990. David Broder reviewed Robert Caro's book, The Years of Lyndon Johnson, and he writes, "The slimy creature who stole the 1948 Texas Senate election, Lyndon Johnson, driven by boundless ambition. His career had been a story of manipulation, deceit, ruthlessness, the morality of the ballot box, in which nothing matters but victory, and any maneuver that leads to victory is justified. Johnson stole the victory in the 1948 Senate race. That campaign was an American classic. Johnson battled a strongly favored opponent to win by the narrowest of margins, 87 vote victory, which earned him the derisive name Landslide Lyndon. Johnson went through an equally breathless battle in the state convention and in the courts to make his clearly tainted victory stand up. And then even in 2006, Greg Abbott, who was Texas Attorney General, now governor, he posted on the Texas Attorney General's website, "Voter fraud is no newcomer to the Lone Star State. 6 decades ago, the votes, quote unquote, found in Jim Wells County, infamous ballot box 13, helped Lyndon Johnson to squeak into a U.S. Senate in 1948 primary." So that was the landslide Lyndon election. We can either think that that was this one-time anomaly, or this was standard operating procedure for corrupt politicians.
Yeah.
And if so, if this is standard operating procedure, we have to think, well, is it stayed that bad, or did they improve on their corruption?
Well, I was just going to, if I can interject real quick, it brings to mind, we always think of the past as being more these benign creatures when it comes to government, the Constitution, but corruption's always been there, right?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? You're implying that today we think, we look back and we go, we assume that people were more honest in their dealings than today because of that, good old boy handshake that we would give to each other when we, made a deal with, that people were just more honest, but that's not so. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, there were more honest people back then than now, because if the founders would have people take an oath. Now, when you study the history of why do you take oaths,
The firm conference is coming up. So I will be speaking Thursday. Yes, the plans have changed. Thursday, speaking on the main stage on the first floor from 4 p.m. to 4:45. So don't miss it. I will also have a booth. Yes, the Firm Foundation featuring the 34th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference, faithfully exploring relevant LDS topics of our time. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. I hear it's amazing. I've never been to one, but I hear it's simply amazing. And that's October 24th, 25th, and 26th of this year. Venue at the Ranches. That's where it will be at 4118 North Clubhouse Lane, Eagle Mountain, Utah, 84005. I guess that's overlooking a beautiful view of the Saratoga Springs Temple. And there's a golf course there. The Ranches Golf Course, brand spanking new full service event center west of Utah Lake. And it will be amazing. There'll be food, folks, and fun. Nostalgic McDonald's commercial.
The idea is you call a higher power to hold you accountable so that you will do what you say you're going to do. So they knew politicians would have the opportunity to do dirty backroom deals and get away with it. But if the politicians believed that God existed and was watching them and was wanting them to be fair and was going to hold them accountable in the future, that would be a deterrent for them to do the corrupt things. But if you get rid of all consciousness of God, then, and if there's no eternal life, then this life is all there is. Well, shoot, you'd be a fool not to do whatever you can to get ahead. And what's a little lie, right? What's a little cheating if it can, at the ends justifies the means. And so I do believe there were more people that believed in God back then. And so there was more of those that had a conscience. There's probably fewer today than back then. But some of the voter fraud improvements, to say, members of one party voting in another party's primary, so they can cross over and the Democrats can vote in a Republican primary. Why? Because they want to eliminate the best Republican candidate and put in somebody that either can't win against the Democrat or would have liberal views. Same day registering and voting so that you can't double check. Unsecured mail-in ballots, multiple mail-in ballots, sent to same voters in different states, sent to students at home and then students at college, and delaying military ballots being sent out, and then delay in counting military ballots. And this even took place during the Civil War. First time you had a lot of soldiers away, and they would fill out their ballots, and guess what? The different commanders would not like the way certain people voted, and they would lose those ballots. And unmanned ballot drop-off locations, stuffing ballot boxes, losing ballots, and the postal system losing ballots, insecure absentee voting, tampering with voting machines. There's a whole history there back when they were mechanical and then electronic. Foreign ownership of voting machine companies. I mean, who owns these? There's one company called Staple Street Capital, and it is a venture capital company, and they own one of these election machine companies. Refusal to purge voter rolls of dead voters or those that have moved away. So you have tens of thousands of extra names on the ballot. Now, why is that important? Because you can do voter fraud and nobody will question it because you don't sign your ballot. And so if they did, all they need is the number. And they can say, well, we have so many thousand of registered voters, even though it could be half that amount because they moved away or died. But if they can say we got this large number, then they can do voter fraud up to that number and just say, well, there was a large voter turnout. Even though there was not a large voter turnout, they could have done the fraud, but it's covered, right?
Right.
Inaccurate ballot preparation, right? So when the news reports were when Katie Hobbs won the governor race in Arizona, that she was in charge of ballot preparation. Well, guess what? The ballots were printed on the paper that was too small for the machines. And she was the one who was in charge of this, and she was the one on the ballot running for governor. And the question is, gee, did she help herself to win there? Allowing non-citizens to vote. I was in Texas, and they were explaining that when you get to your driver's license, there's a little square you check for citizen. And there's nobody in the Texas government that checks to see if somebody checks the citizen box that they actually are a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
It's the honor system. All they got to do is check the box. Okay, we're going to take care of it. Orchestrated computer glitches, rigging of electronic voting machines, deep state interference.
Well, then
There
you
was,
had the hanging chads. Remember that? Yeah.
yeah, this was a U.S. News report and the Daily Caller report. And it was an allegation that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security actually hacked into the Georgia voting machines during the election.
Wow.
And then you have Lieutenant General Tom McInerney exposed deep state computer hacking called Scorecard, which was this weapon that would manipulate it. And it's, quote, on the latest episode, Lieutenant General Tom McInerney issues a dire warning to the Trump administration to investigate and shut down Scorecard and Hammer immediately. So these are different computer programs that hack voting machines. Now, these are actual headlines. This is November 4th, 2021. Racine County Sheriff refers criminal charges against 5 top Wisconsin election commissioners in nursing home voting scam. Here's a Gateway Pundit article. More fraud in New Jersey's election uncovered. Voting machines would not allow citizens to vote Republican for the Republican governor candidate. The machines wouldn't. Another article, Gateway Pundit, November 4th, 2021. New Jersey governor race for Democrat Murphy by 20,000 votes after he mysteriously gained 40,000 ballots overnight. Another article, 1 year ago, election night, all state reporting was zeroed out on the Edison election reporting system. And then this is another one. Stunning, on the anniversary of 2020 election, 56% of voters now believe there was cheating. And and then you have like Pennsylvania, where their constitution says only the legislature can change voting rules, and yet some unelected person changed the voting rules to let votes come in for days after the election and so forth. And it was a clear violation, but for some strange reason, Amy Coney Barrett recused herself from wanting to weigh in on Pennsylvania's having this unelected official change the voting rules when the legislature was the only one that could. And why did she recuse herself? And that allowed Biden to win there. And so the Heritage Foundation has an entire website of a database called Documented Election Fraud Cases. And these are hundreds of documented cases of election vote fraud. So Joseph Stalin remarked in 1923 in a book called The Memoirs of Stalin's Former Secretary, Boris Bazanov, published 2002. Stalin said, I consider it completely unimportant who in the party will vote or how. But what is extraordinarily important is this: who will count the votes and how. So we can either think that the LBJ voter fraud was a one-time thing, or we can say that ambitious people have been improving on that. And, sort of like water under pressure will find the leak, right? So you have pipes in your house, and water goes through it. And if you turn up the pressure in those pipes, well, if there's any place where it's not sealed correctly, guess what? It's going to leak. And so you have a system called a republic with a constitution, with elections, and selfish, ambitious people will find the place where they can leak. Their selfish nature will find, if there's a way to do fraud, they'll find a way to do it. And anyway, so that's the Machiavellian idea. He was an Italian philosopher in the 1500s, and he would make statements in his book, The Prince, that one must consider the final result. Politics have no relation to morals. So if your end is good in your mind, then any means necessary to achieve that end is justified. lie,
Hmm.
cheat, steal, anything if you achieve your goal. Now, obviously, that's unchristian. Jesus didn't say, go out and lie, cheat, steal, murder, and rape to show the world I love them.
No.
No, if you're going to spread God's message, you have to do it through God's means,
Right.
and it's through truth. So that was LBJ. That was the voting. But now he's in the Senate, and he's 2 terms as the U.S. Senator from Texas before he became John F. Kennedy's vice president. And so while he was in the Senate, he became Senate Majority Leader, and he had his um, main chief of staff was a guy named Bobby Baker. Bobby Baker was the Jeffrey Epstein of the era. He had the Quorum Club. Instead of the Epstein Island, it was called the Quorum Club.
Hmm.
And it was the second floor of the Carroll Arms Hotel in Washington, D.C. And that's where senators would meet their call girls. And so, because Bobby Baker arranged for these senators to meet these girls, he had all the dirt on the senators, and he would tell all that dirt to LBJ, who would twist their arm and make them vote the way he wanted them to vote because he had the dirt on them. And so the Life magazine is the biggest magazine in the country, and they did a front page article called the Bobby Baker Bombshell. And it was printed the first week of November in 1963. And so one of the quotes, the Quorum Club was a place where a guy wanted to get away. This is Bobby Baker being interviewed.
Okay.
A guy wanted to get away, from being at the bar downstairs at the Carroll Arms where there were too many reporters. It was an easy place for lobbyists to get together with a senator or a senator's girlfriend. All had girlfriends. And the Quorum Club was the place where you could be met there and nobody would know about it. It was a social club, right? And then James Wagonwood, assistant to Life magazine's executive editor, James Wagonwood wrote, beginning in the summer of 1963, the magazine, based on information fed from the Justice Department, and the head of the Justice Department was Robert F. Kennedy. They had been developing a news story, and the piece concerning Lyndon Johnson and Bobby Baker, who was the advisor to Johnson, accused of bribery and arranging call girls. The quote goes on publication, Johnson would have been finished off, and he would have been taken off the 1964 ticket. So John F. Kennedy would not have had LBJ as his running mate for reelection.
Oh, interesting.
And it would have caused LBJ to actually face prison time. At the time, Life magazine was arguably the most important general news source in the U.S. Top management at Time Inc. was closely allied with USA's various intelligence agencies and were used by the Kennedy Justice Department as a conduit to the public. LBJ Baker piece was in the final editing stages and was scheduled to break in the issue of the magazine due to come out the week of November 24th of 1963.
Wow.
Well, that was November 24th. What happened 2 days earlier? November 22nd, 1963. Well, John F. Kennedy was there in Texas with LBJ. One of the books on it said LBJ told one of his mistresses that he won't have to worry about the Irish mafia anymore. And so that was when Kennedy was shot. And Johnson demanded that Jacqueline Kennedy, in her bloodstained dress, wait for hours in the hot Air Force One with no air conditioning until finally he gets the photograph of him swearing in on a Catholic missal. There was no Bible there. And aboard Air Force One. And so then Johnson's now the president. And what does Johnson do? He sets up the Warren Commission to, quote unquote, investigate Kennedy's assassination. And historians and researchers such as Alexander Fursenko, and then another one, Tim Nafal, and others debated whether or not Johnson's Warren Commission was investigating the assassination or it was designed as obfuscation operation, a covering up of evidence implicating Johnson. So sort of like the Robert Mueller's investigation, that all it did was subpoena all of the evidence that could convict Hillary of Russian collusion
Mm-hmm.
and destroy the evidence. So servers in her basement, confiscate them, destroy them. Cell phones, confiscate them, destroy them, delete. Emails, delete. A text message. I mean, it's like all the Mueller investigation was destroying the evidence that could convict Hillary, while Hillary was paying for the Steele dossier to accuse Trump of Russian collusion. And so, sort of like Lord Acton, the British statesman, once said, official truth is not actual truth.
That's very true.
So the story is that J. Edgar Hoover, and who else was on this Warren Commission but Gerald Ford, they there was those that wanted to do more investigation, and they wanted to investigate the possibility of Lyndon Johnson being involved. And J. Edgar Hoover says, enough. It was lone gunman. Don't ask any more questions. That's the story. And anyway, but even Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, right? John F. Kennedy's wife, who had to stand there for 2 hours, she felt like Lyndon Johnson was connected with her husband's assassination. And so the Daily Mail published an article, August 8th, 2011. Jackie Onassis tapes of an interview reveal how she believed Lyndon B. Johnson was involved in the assassination of her husband, John F. Kennedy.
Wait, what year was that she did that interview?
Well, it was, I'm not sure when it was done,
Okay.
but it was published. This Daily Mail .co.uk was published August 8th of 2011.
Okay.
So usually whenever the she did these interviews, and they may have gotten limited readership, but whenever this story comes out in the news, people do some digging and they find quotes that they can bring up. During Lyndon Johnson's administration, not only are we talking about John F. Kennedy being killed, but shortly thereafter, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated April 4th, 1968, during LBJ's administration. And who else? Senator Robert Kennedy was assassinated June 5th, 1968. So 2 days after John F. Kennedy was shot, LBJ escalated U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, thus changing the headlines on all the newspapers from the questions about the assassination to this war. And so this is a tactic that goes all the way back to Plato, 431 BC. Plato was one of the leading citizens in Athens, but he was getting too powerful. And so there was a rumor of wanting to ostracize Plato, which is where you get 6,000 citizens to vote and kick somebody out of town for 10 years, and it ends their political career. And so when Plato heard this rumor, he intentionally let relations with Sparta, a city-state to the south, he let relations deteriorate. So a war started, the Peloponnesian War. And once there was a war, everybody stopped talking about getting rid of Pericles. And instead they said, well, we want Pericles because he's a strong leader. We need a strong leader during this time of war. And from that point on, whenever you would have a president facing a lot of scrutiny, that's usually when the country would get involved in a war, and the headlines would change. We saw even a hint of this when Bill Clinton was going through the Monica Lewinsky trials, and he shoots some missiles off into Bosnia.
Yeah.
And there was even a movie called Wag the Dog with Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro about a president running for re-election involved in a sexual scandal, and he wants to start a war in Albania, which happens to border Serbia. And anyway, so LBJ was known for vulgarity, lots of stories of mistresses, and I won't get into all of that. But you know, in the Bible, there was King David, and he was involved in a sexual scandal with Bathsheba. And so, what did he do? He orchestrated a battlefield loss to kill Bathsheba's husband and to cover up his sin. So, the idea of, right, doing that. Numbers 32:23 says, "Be sure your sin will find you out. It may come right away, it may come years later." I did live in Texas, and it was um, in the 1990s, and there was a news report, and it said it's whatever the anniversary was of LBJ's death, and he supposedly gave a bedside confession, and it was decided that it would be sealed and not read for X number of years until after his death. And so this was the X number of years, and so the news reporters were saying, "I wonder what's in there. I wonder what's in there." Well, then the anniversary came and left, and there wasn't any more talk about it. And so you wonder what it was that it was on his conscience there. So anyway, all this that I mentioned is in a post on my website, AmericanMinute.com, and I have hundreds of posts where I go through history. But this one's titled "Landslide Lyndon and the Assassination of a President." And so AmericanMinute.com is my website.
Awesome. Do you have any other links that you want to send me, or can we find everything on that website?
Yeah, that's the website.
That is the go-to.
Yeah, one of the books that I talk about a lot of this stuff is called Socialism: The Real History from Plato to the Present. And I go through, the subtitle is How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control. So most people don't want to give up their freedom, but there's two ways in which you can get people to give up their freedom: fear and free stuff.
Right.
If they get into fear, they'll panic and trade their freedom for security. Or you give them free stuff until they get dependent. And then you want some more free stuff, you're going to have to sell yourself into prostitution, right? It's like a drug dealer takes over a neighborhood two ways. He can come in with guns, get everybody in fear, and they submit to the mob. Or the drug dealer's so nice, he's giving away free drugs till you get hooked. And then you want some more free drugs, right? You're going to have to give up your freedom for it. And so we have a republic in America where we have citizens. The word citizen is Greek. It means co-ruler, co-sovereign, co-king. So in America, the people are the king. And so how do you get the people to give up their freedom? You have crises so that everybody gets into fear, and then they'll knee-jerk reaction, trade their freedom for security, or you get them dependent. You destabilize the economy so it crashes. Everybody goes to the government, and the government says, we'll give you bailouts until you get dependent on these bailouts. And then if you want to keep the bailouts coming, we're going to want to track you and facial recognition and make sure there's no guns in your house and make sure you don't say anything that's not politically correct, or otherwise we're going to lower your social credit score, and your CBDC, central bank digital currency, is not going to work anymore, and you won't be able to buy gas, and you won't be able to fly. And so it's called the Great Reset. It's an orchestrated global crisis.
Yeah.
And so, people have been planning. I wrote on the history of the world in a book called Change to Chains. And from Nimrod, Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsar, you have people, the dictators that would love to conquer the world and be the Antichrist, so to speak, but they die off, right? But each time there's new military advancements that allow them to kill more people, and new technological advancements that allow them to track more people. So these kingdoms keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, Jesus said, "Wheat and tares grow together till the harvest." And so if they have their wicked plans, but it keeps getting interrupted by people standing up. But you can see that it's coming down to a showdown, and I think this is a critical time for our country, and so we need leaders. I tell people, don't get discouraged. the Egyptians were wanting to kill the Israelites, but God raised up an 80-year-old Moses, right? The Philistines wanted to kill the Israelites. God raised up a teenager David, and there's God raised up Esther to go in to see the king in Babylon, and God loves to wait until things look hopeless, and then he
Yeah,
raises up little nobodies with faith and courage, and things turn around, and he gets the glory. But this is our turn, and we can sit back, or we can say, God, here I am, use me.
that's right. Do you mind if I ask some questions about it?
Sure, yeah. I
Okay,
do have another interview coming up, but go ahead.
sure. Uh, do you feel that his main LBJ's main motivation behind the Kennedy assassination was to because he was afraid that he might go to prison, or what were there other factors?
I think that was one of the factors. Um, and Dick Morris has written on this. Several different people have written on it. The one thing that's for certain is the government narrative is deceptive.
Yeah,
They were the lone gunman theory, right? And then it spread all over the internet a picture of the real car that Kennedy was in, and there's a bullet hole through the front windshield. And it's like, wait a second. I thought it was this lone gunman, this one shot that ricocheted all around and ran into, and it's
hmm,
like, oh, there's the evidence of, and so then they said, well, okay, we have to sort of admit that we weren't telling you everything. And of course, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he is flat out uh, pointing to the CIA involved in killing not just John F. Kennedy, but also killing his dad. And then you had Tucker Carlson did an interview with different people and found out that Nixon, who had ran against John F. Kennedy, Nixon was going to release all the documentations about what went on behind the scenes. And that's when, according to this interview that Tucker Carlson did with,
hmm.
I can't remember the
I
name offhand,
remember that interview. Yeah.
but he said that you had Watergate, and I don't know if it was 4 out of 5 of the people that were involved in this Watergate break-in, they were all either FBI or CIA people. It
Mhm.
was a setup. They just wanted a setup that they could blame on, and all Nixon did was cover for some of these underlings, not realizing that the majority of them were FBI agents anyway. But once he got involved in covering for them, then they could catch him on lying.
Right.
And he didn't even go through an impeachment trial. He just decided to resign. He could have fought it out, but anyway. And then you had Trump supposedly was going to immediately release all the Kennedy assassination files, and for some reason Pompeo talked him out of it. Hmm. And so we now with John F. Kennedy Jr. Being involved in what's going on, I would think that he would be more inclined to release a lot of that stuff that's been hidden. Um, and I think that there is a deep state, and they do want power. I think they're connected with globalists that want power. Um,
Absolutely.
and um, I've had a chance to go to different countries in the world and see how China comes in, and they do the bribe or the bullet, right? The China Silk Road Initiative. They go to country after country after country and says, if you play our game, we'll give you lots of money. If you don't, bad things will happen. And they go into African countries where there's minerals, and they bribe all these politicians. They did that in Panama when you know, we controlled the Panama Canal, and Jimmy Carter pushed through us giving it up. And so Panama put out bids. Who's going to run the canal zone? Some Dutch companies gave really good bids, some American companies, I think maybe Japanese companies, but China comes in, bribes the Panamanian politicians under the table, and they give the bid to China.
Mhm.
And so you see that China is really skilled at bribing politicians or threatening politicians. And then when you begin to look at America's politicians, some of them have girlfriends that are, Chinese spies. That one senator, was it Feinstein? Her like chauffeur, driver, right? I mean, and then even, McConnell. I mean, different ties that warrant people looking into. And Washington warned about this. You think George Washington? Yeah, yeah. Now back then it was France and Britain, but Washington said real patriots that refuse to take bribes are going to be maligned in the media, and the dupes that are betraying their country are going to receive the applause of the media. And Washington wrote in real long sentences, so I'm paraphrasing there. But so it's human nature. The bribe or the bullet are the two motivating forces, a positive reward or a negative, like training a dog, right? You do what I want, here's a treat. You don't do what I want, you get disciplined or whatever. And so this bribe or the bullet is what corrupt people do. They will go to politicians and say, if you vote the way we want, we'll take care of you. If you don't, bad things will happen.
That's right. Yeah. No good. What do they say? No good deed goes unpunished. And if sometimes doing what's right, you don't always end up the popular guy. Thank you so much, Bill, for coming on the program. I had more questions, but we can get those answered at your website, AmericanMinute.com.
Yeah,
right?
I'd be happy to come on with you again in the future.
Yes, please, because I wanted to ask about the Bushes and some other stuff, but we didn't have time. Thank you so much, and God bless.
God bless you.